funny story, but this is how I met Emily. So when I moved back to Michigan from Chicago, I have always, worked in politics and started wondering about what was happening because I was married in one state, moved to another state, wasn't married, wanted to look up what's going on with the LGBT community. And I found a clip of Emily on YouTube on the state capitol when she was working for Equality Michigan, talking about why it matters and why queer folk matter. And I was inspired, and that's kind of how I started getting into LGBTQ politics here in Michigan. So I'm really happy that she's here, and we all should give them a round of applause and let them get started.
Can you all hear me without a microphone?
Probably.
Great. So I'm going to start with a funny story about Emily. I'm not.
Do we have a way to turn this off?
Unplug it. So my name is Jay Maddock, and thank you, Jen and Aaron, for the invite. And thank you all for coming inside on a Michigan sunny day. I appreciate that. So we're going to be talking about the life cycle of the fly. Is that what everyone was? Yes.
That sounds good.
Okay, great. We're going to be talking about LGBTQ identities and issues facing the LGBT community, and ending with an action. Does that sound more like what you were all saying?
Yeah. We're not there yet. This is still the joke portion.
Oh,
of
right.
the
Okay,
agenda.
great. Yeah. Okay, great.
We built that in.
We did.
We're not out of that.
Okay, funny jokes. Don't you have some?
I don't have a funny story about you.
No one does. Very serious. So I'm so excited that I get to present with Emily. We met tonight. No, we didn't. But we have not ever gotten to present together, which is exciting, to have an excuse to come together and hear another viewpoint and more experienced expert.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you all for letting me be here to assist. I will be assisting Jay because Jay, of course, is your expert in the area. He leads your community center. I'm a guest in town, but this is my hometown. So I grew up here and then abandoned you, basically, to go to Lansing and get swallowed up by politics. And then, everything went to hell, and so I got stuck there. So I'm back here to assist Jay and just be whatever help I can and tell worse jokes to make his look better.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll pay you for that later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My presentation style is I like to make you do the work. So I hope you're okay with that. Too late. You're here. When we're talking about LGBTQ identities, we're talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, and then there are also a lot of other identities that fall under that acronym of letters, right? And we're talking about sexual orientation and gender identity, which are two parts of our greater identity, right? And spoiler alert, everyone has a sexual orientation. And everyone has a gender, not just LGBTQ people. So if you are straight or you are cisgender, cisgender means someone whose gender aligns and is the same as the sex assigned at birth. So if you are cisgender or straight, you also have a sexual orientation and gender identity. So I want us to all be on the same page, right? But those are parts of who we are, right? There's lots of parts of who we are. And some of these parts are really, really important to us. Some are secondary. Some we are forced to think about all the time, right? Because some of us have identities that are marginalized, right? And some of us have a privilege of not having to think about parts of who we are, right? But we carry all of this with us as we walk through. So this is the participation part. What are examples of parts of who you are? I'll just wait. Yeah.
I'm a young person.
A young person. Absolutely. So our age, our generation is part of our identity. Absolutely.
Place of birth.
Our place of birth, absolutely. Where we were born, where we grew up, where we live now. If we left our hometown and never came back.
Our
What else?
careers.
What?
Our careers.
Your careers, yeah, absolutely. There's another hand. That. Mom, our family role, absolutely.
I'm white, but just so white.
He's super duper white.
Yeah, that is accurate. Yes, and being white or our race is part of our identity, absolutely. What else?
Religion.
Our religion.
Organizations we belong to,
Yeah, our affiliations, certainly.
our health status.
Our health status, absolutely.
Our talents, or
Our talents or skills, or even ones that we think we have, like joke telling. Not confirmed yet. So our identities are huge, and there's lots of different components, right? And they can be things that were always part of us, or they can be things that became part of us, right? So folks who are parents in the room, before you were a parent, that probably wasn't that big of an identity to you, right? But when you became a parent, that became a larger part of your identity. So these are big things. So you have with you a half piece of paper that has 3 rectangles. One that it looks orange, I promise it's red. My printer just wasn't in the mood.
Unless you like orange better.
Yeah, yellow and green. And what I'd like you to do now is think of the 3 most important parts of who you are and write 1 per box, right? And we are going to be discussing these with partners. So if there's a part of you that you don't want to disclose to someone, maybe think of a different one, but make a mental note that you did that. And so I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to think of the 3 most important parts of who you are, or the 3 most, the parts of you that you express the most often is another way, a different way to look at it as well.
And I do encourage you to be vulnerable if you are able, if you feel safe, and to not put yourself out there if you don't feel safe. To do what you need to do to protect yourself if you feel it's necessary.
So, let me clarify this again because something's past between my ears and my brain.
Large group to go quiet is ask for a person to speak to that whole group. If you ever find yourself facilitating, you can borrow that tactic. Does anyone want to share what they were discussing? Okay, don't worry, I'll ask again.
well, of all your directions, we heard the grocery store thing the most, and we realized that in our 3 things, these usually don't show up in the grocery store. Except for 2 of us are writers, and we often correct grocery store signs.
It's a fun hobby.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so you raise up a really good point, though, is oftentimes we express to strangers parts of our identity, whether we think we're doing it or not, right? So if you are wearing a necklace that has a cross on it, or a Star of David, you are communicating a religion to people, right? If you have on the back of, I used to say pictures in your wallet, and I've had to now adjust that, because I get looks from people. But your screen background on your phone, updated it. If you have your kids or your pet or your significant other, you're communicating that whenever you pull out your phone. And how often do you pull out your phone, right? So there are ways that we unintentionally communicate who we are, unless we know for a fact that it's not safe to do so. Then we go to extreme lengths not to. So I didn't go through a lot of work to create color-coded boxes, even though my printer didn't want to make one of them red, for nothing. So now we're going to create different scenarios. So the piece of your identity that you wrote in the green box is not protected legally. So you can be fired from your job, you can be refused housing, and you can be kicked out of public accommodations. So you can be kicked out of the grocery store just because of this part of who you are. In the yellow box, this same rules of the green box apply Except now, the person you are closest to doesn't accept this part of who you are. So the majority of your friends and family do support it, but this one person that you're closest to does not. On the red box, that none of your family or friends accept that part of who you are, and you still don't have public protections. So what I want you to think about is how does that change? And on the back, there are actually questions for each of the color-coded boxes that you can discuss. I want you to go through and discuss how this changes how you express these. How does it change how you feel about yourself? Now, because we left it up to a bunch of different identities, if you put your career down for any of them, and I'm saying, well, you could be fired for your job, and you're going, Jay, I don't get that. Let's say that it's for your job, if you put down that you're a teacher, landlords don't trust teachers to pay rent, so they won't rent to teachers, okay? Or let's say that who you are as a person, you're not supposed to be a teacher, so any other part of your identity prevents you from being that, so you could be fired from that job for just who you are fulfilling that job. If you put down your family role, and I'm saying that people closest to you don't accept that, maybe if you put down that you were a mother, your family doesn't like how you are a mom, or they didn't think that you were going to be a good mom, or they wanted you to be a father, or if you put down that you were a brother, they wanted a sister, right? So you can think of switching that up. And if you have other reaches that you don't understand how you can get creative and bridge that, I'm going to put Emily on the spot. Emily and I are more than happy to help you get creative on that, okay? So, yeah.
We're not changing what we wrote, it's
Nope.
just.
You're not changing what you wrote, it's just the scenarios now applying to that. So, yeah, good question.
Right, so the green dots. I would use it for
Does anyone want to share what they discussed in their pairs or trios?
I stabbed some
Anything that came up for folks?
Well, I can say one thing. You know, the way I looked at this, I kind of put the things that I thought were important to me in that order, top to bottom. And it kind of turned out that that kind of worked for what you put on the back of it. You know, I don't know if that was, the colors did that for me or what, but, you know. So it's kind of interesting that it actually kind of fit for me,
Yeah.
you know, as far as the
Well,
problems.
I tend to think that I'm pretty skilled, but I don't think I'm that skilled to make it line up for everybody. Thank you. There's a comment in the back there.
Actually, you're very skilled because what I have in my green box is teacher. And so, you know, I kind of thought about this in terms of, okay, if all of a sudden I didn't have legal protection for my job status, or if how I identified with my career something that was prohibiting me from supporting myself financially, well, that identity that I put that green box is something that I could change or walk away from. And it made me kind of think about what other people might have put in that box, and that's not always an option. So it kind of brought up a lot of feelings of empathy in that sense.
Thank you.
We had sort of a similar discussion, if it was something that could be changed, well, we'll go change that, maybe you're making a trade-off. If it's not, then we were forced to sort of choose between trying to hide that part of ourselves or trying to find a community that was supportive.
Yeah.
It was interesting because the things that I wrote down, I said immediately I wouldn't change a damn thing. It would still be that way no matter what. But there was a time when it wasn't. Before marriage was legal, you know, because I was a teacher, there were just a lot of, and I'm retired now, so a lot of things have changed for me. It's like, wow, I'm finally free.
Yeah.
I don't care who knows now, you know, but it changed how I did things for 37 years.
Well, and you raise up a good point, right? You, at the time when you were teaching, you went to great lengths with great energy to hide some things. And, you know, and the result of what that feels like, you know, to do day in and day out for, you know, over 3 decades, you know, and what a lifetime of that feels like for folks. And that is the reality. And I don't need people to raise their hands or out themselves, but like consider if when you were doing this, if it was just when I said, okay, now imagine it, and you're like, I don't have to imagine. Like, this is a reality for this identity, right? Because for folks in this room that had to pretend and stretch, that's access to some privilege. That folks that belong to the LGBTQ community, folks that are not white, Christian, middle class or higher, male, these are things that folks, that they don't have access to privilege, right? There are folks that live in a marginalized population beyond the LGBTQ. When we talk about intersectional identities, that this is the day in and day out. This is not a 15-minute role play, right?
I became a very good liar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seriously, that's a horrible way to have to be.
It is. And I mean, with simple questions, right, that you answer with colleagues and workers, or what are you doing this weekend? Or, things that we don't even, that if we haven't been in a position to think about, we don't have to think about, right? Like, what are you doing this weekend? What are your plans? Or, are you excited about, summer vacation? Or all those things that you have to then code and figure out what's the lie, right? Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
And it's important to know, and Jay is hinting strongly at this, that not feeling good means real damage. It has real tangible implications. So being closeted leads to high suicide rates. It leads to depression. It leads to drug abuse. It leads to all of these other things that we can translate as coping. And of course it is a response to trying to be safer. But some people also translate some members of the community as seeking privilege just by not being seen. And I, as a bi person, I know that when I am dating a man and I'm not recognized easily as being bi, then people assume that I have a privilege by not being recognized as being bi. But when it is assumed that I am not in the community and people don't accept me as being in the community, I, like other bi people, am at much higher risk for still depression and suicide and drug use. And also that stigma of not being accepted by the community also leads to higher rates of sexual assault and domestic violence and all of those other things. So being closeted is not just sad, it's damage.
Well, I appreciate the folks that shared and opened up. This role play, is an activity that sort of, one, can hopefully draw out some empathy, but also consider how often, day in and day out, we unintentionally, or even we are unaware of doing this, tell people our story and who we are. And how often, if you don't feel safe doing that, you have to put energy into avoiding that or trying to fit into protecting yourself. Because in Michigan, the best that an LGBTQ person can hope for is the green scenario. That your family and friends will have your back, but you know that the state doesn't. Because you can be fired, you can be not hired, and they can the employer can openly say that it's because you're gay or transgender. Right? That they can just openly say that. Or you can be refused housing. So a landlord can choose not to rent you or kick you out or terminate your lease because of your sexual orientation or gender identity.
You can also just be perceived to be a member of our community and be denied those things.
Yeah. So, and you can be refused public accommodation too, right? There's, a family here in Kalamazoo, well, many families here in Kalamazoo, but there was recently a family that called us because they were kicked out of a restaurant because their daughter is trans. And another restaurant, a person at the restaurant said that they felt uncomfortable after the daughter and mom used the restroom. So, this is something that happens close to our home, and so that's the reality. So, as we're talking about, LGBT issues, we're talking about real people, but this is all really Debbie Downer. The positive on this is that there is something that we can all do, right? This isn't something that we have no control over. There's something that we can do. And I'm hoping Emily can talk a little bit about what's happening in Lansing and the state of Michigan right now of the policies that are really impacting LGBTQ people and all of us right now.
And it's still gonna be a little Debbie Downer.
But the same way, while you're listening to Emily, I want you to keep in your mind that I can do something about this.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about how later, but
One
more
of
depressing
the
than it is.
challenges of right now is that it's hard to talk about civil rights and not have it be a challenging, disheartening conversation. We have work to do. We have real work to do. I just came off of 2 weeks of working on a murder. Why am I working on a murder? I'm a civil rights leader. But when a murder happens, and the murder has affected somebody in our community, I'm one of the main people in the state that gets called. And I get thrown right into the middle of the case. And I know way too much about how this particular case. And I am working directly with the chief of police that day, or actually for the whole thing, and the prosecutor, and the survivors of the victim. And I am, because as soon as we hear that something happened, it's on me to help to identify whether it was a hate crime and try to make sure it gets responsibly categorized that way, and that the case is treated as such and moves in the right direction and follows the correct protocol. And then it doesn't matter even if it does. Because in Michigan, our Ethnic Intimidation Act, our Hate Crimes Act, doesn't include sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression as listed classes under our Ethnic Intimidation Act. So my challenge is to try to get all of those entities within the process to even develop a box to check, to notice the red flags, to start to see that our community is being disproportionately affected by hate, so that maybe we can send it to the federal government, who we hope at this time in history will even pay attention. But then we come back to, that's something. Getting a box to check is something. Quantifying how much we are affected is making the case for our protection. Getting the police to call the advocate the day something happened so that we can be a part of the community response and educating the community and making sure that we can be a part of making sure the community knows how to be safe that day is part of what we can do to make it better. And then saying to our legislators, this is why we need a change to this law. That's part of how we make it better. The legislation, the amendment to the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act that we've been asking to be amended for 30-some years now, was just reintroduced yesterday. And it's, again, to add sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression to our Civil Rights Act, so that what Jay was just talking about does not happen anymore. It's so that it is explicitly laid out that that cannot happen to our community, because until it is, it will be happening to our community. And there are still efforts to make sure, to write into law, that people can discriminate against us anyway, as long as they claim it's based on a strongly held religious belief or moral conviction. Because people are so afraid that we might actually make progress on getting protections for ourselves against discrimination. So what we can do is defend the Constitution, is to say we already have protections for our religious liberties in the strongest document in the land, is to say that we need to protect LGBT people as strongly as we protect anybody else, is to make sure that the people that we put in charge, or that somebody else puts in charge at every level in government, advocates for everybody equally, and our protection, our safety, our equality. And that means Betsy DeVos, our children. So that is what we can do. is to stay in communication, is to hold our leaders accountable to us because they serve us, because they're there to serve and represent us. And then to make sure that we are always in communication and making sure we're asking people to be in office that represent our interests. So there are always things that we can do.
And, you know, Emily's talking about this big picture, right, of talking to our government and talking to our elected officials, both all the way up to our federal government, to our local, but there are smaller steps that we can take first. If you're thinking, well, that sounds like a big task, we'll ask that again of you.
I
But,
just want you to save the world.
yeah, that's all, that's all. Preferably before my bedtime tonight.
Yes.
Yeah. But the smaller things that we can do is just learning more about the vocabulary and the way that we talk about people, right? Because we can unintentionally throw signals up to LGBTQ people that says that we're not an ally because we're using the wrong terminology or we're not talking about people in a respectful way. So one of the smallest things that we can do is educate ourselves on how to talk about the LGBT community and how to send signals to the LGBT community that we are an ally and that we're there. Because that can make a huge difference in someone's life who might be exhausted from a day of hiding themselves again and again to find one safe person or safer person, right?
And it's the very first thing we should do.
Yes, it is. So there's another sheet that you have. It's a full-page sheet this time that has some words and definitions, some sentences, you might say. And so take a moment and look through those definitions. And if there are questions that you have, you can ask Emily and I. If there are words that you don't see on here that you would like a definition for because you've heard it, you can ask us as well. But there's one caveat, and that is that you don't use these glossaries for every single person that you meet. If you hear someone identify as gay, you don't look at this sheet and like fold it out from here and be like, the North American gay man. Right? Because people use different words, and we all have different definitions. What you might have remembered from your first activity, you might have been sharing the same word, but you might have had different meanings for what that meant, right? You had a label for the part of who you are, but you might have been meaning something slightly different or drastically different from a person that was in your group or across the room. Because we all use our own labels, and with that, our own definitions, but when we try to put those labels on other people, it comes with all of our assumptions and all of our biases. So glossary can be a helpful tool, but I also dislike them strongly.
Do a quick skim, and if questions come up, remember we are open to vulnerability, and there are no stupid questions. And I were talking about this a little bit because I don't fit on a binary. I actually just recently acknowledged that I don't consider myself to fit on a gender binary, and don't know that I ever have, but I didn't ever feel like I could say so. And I certainly don't feel like I know that I don't fit on a asexuality binary, and I don't consider bisexuality to mean that. That definition of bisexuality says something like either gender, or one or the other, or something like that.
A term that describes someone who is attracted to both men and women, or to more than one gender identity.
That's a lot of crap. Because, one, it's suggesting that other people have one or another gender, and I don't believe in binaries. And I am attracted to people regardless of gender. I am attracted to smart and funny, and I'm trying to be attracted to nice. It's do you have something to say about that?
Well, no, I'm just going to say, like, we only have an hour, so we can't get into the issues of attraction to good and evil. I think that, a way to think of, when you talk about binaries, is this system that's set up that you have, A or B. And it's black or white. There's no gray area. There's no room to expand that. And that not only that, but once you select the blue pill or the red pill. That you're stuck there and there's no movement. But how many of us put down a part of our identity that has changed as we've grown? Probably most of us. And so that's true for all parts of who we are, right? Things evolve because we do as well. And so if we try to trap it into like this binary of like A or B, we limit ourselves and we also limit other people. So I don't know if I confused people or added clarity, but I don't have time to.
How does this connect to fluidity?
That's a great question.
Okay.
Gender fluidity, or gender fluid, is someone who believes that they don't align with the binary. It's someone who is rejecting the cultural standards of what it is to be a man or woman, and is being themselves and redefining, what that means for them, and can oftentimes when we think of gender and the roles that we assign to that, we're actually thinking about gender expression, right? We're thinking about the outward communication that we're giving to people, and for a lot of us, our gender expression changes depending on the context, right? It can change minute to minute. How many of us wear the same outfit to the gym that we would wear to a wedding? Just this all the time. No, I just don't go to the
That
gym,
works.
guys. So, we switch that gender expression. So we're fluid with our gender expression, but we haven't yet gotten to the point where we can think about that for our own gender as well.
Can fluidity apply to sexual orientation as well?
Sure can.
Okay. Right.
And then how do pronouns relate to our gender?
So pronouns, can be many things. He, him, she, hers, they, them, sie, zir, and other pronouns, right? So when we're talking about they, them, or sie and zir, or other examples, we're talking about gender pronouns that are off and outside of the binary system, right? That's being respectful to someone who is saying, I don't identify as being a man, I don't identify as being a woman, and I don't want to be boxed into that. Pronouns are a way for us to basically tell someone, I see you, right, for who you are. It's a quick way to be respectful to someone. And so there's lots of discussion going on right now about whether when you're in a meeting setting or a group setting, if you should have pronouns as part of the introduction, which can put some folks on the spot who maybe don't want to have to out their pronoun to folks, right? But it's often important to give people an option to be able to identify that so that folks have an opportunity to see them.
Can you explain that last one?
Z and zir.
What is that?
It's just it's equivalent to they and them. It's just it's a third gender pronoun. So it's giving outside of the binary. And I don't know how to explain it beyond that. Maybe someone else.
How
in the
would you
room
use
is
it
an
in a
expert.
sentence?
Z and zir, you would use it as like Z is going to present the next section, or Z is going to the grocery store, and then zir would be would be saying, oh, this belongs to zir. Yeah.
It's mine, just
I was like,
So pronoun calling.
yeah.
So the pronouns can also be fluid. So if a person is feeling like she one day and a he another day, or they can just.
Yeah, a person's
Which might be the
pronouns.
Z and zero then.
Yeah, a person's pronouns is going to match how
Right.
that person identifies, right?
But
And-
identity is not necessarily a permanent thing.
No, identity is not. Besides, unless someone, for like coincidentally throughout their life identifies as one thing, but I think oftentimes our identities shift and change.
So how do we know which pronouns to use for somebody?
The best policy is to ask someone politely what pronouns they use. And it doesn't have, it's also about the tone of your voice, right? There's a difference in, what pronouns do you use? Hey, what pronouns should I use when talking about you, right?
I use they, their, or she, her right now. I'm still deciding. And we used to ask people what preferred pronouns, but we don't do that anymore, or we're trying not to,
Yeah.
because your pronouns are your pronouns. Preferred implies that perhaps the person isn't sure, or they don't know who they are.
Or, I mean, or, you know, preference, like, you know, like, I prefer broccoli over cauliflower.
Right.
But if you give me cauliflower, I'll still eat it. But my pronouns are he and him. If you use she and her, that's not like a second choice. Like, I'm not gonna be okay with that, right? Like that's, like, I want you to use he and him to respect me, and to bring out my humanity, right? And you know, what I hear oftentimes too, and Emily, maybe you hear this too, is folks that are well-intended when they're asked to say their pronouns for the first time because they're not used to having to disclose that, they'll say, whatever. But I don't think if we pause that that's going to be true for the majority of people. Because we want to be respected and we want our pronouns used. And if you were in a situation where every time someone called you the wrong pronoun, it would start to irritate you and make you uncomfortable. But I think oftentimes we unintentionally like, oh, you can call me whatever. And we may not always mean that because pronouns are important and it's okay to claim pronouns and say, this is important to me. I want you to call me by these pronouns.
One easy way to make any meeting more inclusive of LGBTQ people is when you start the meeting and you're asking people to introduce themselves, have people introduce their names, whatever other information you're asking them to mention, and also their pronouns. And have everybody do it. Ask everybody to offer their pronouns. And if you need to explain what that is, you can give the explanation definition that Jay just did, but it's one way that you are saying this is a safe place. This is a place where we are saying that you are welcome as well. But it's also making clear to everybody that this is the respectful way that you address this person.
You can also, I mean, in other ways, if you're in a meeting where you're not going to be doing introductions, making sure that if you're leading a meeting, by example, on your name tag, under your name, you put pronouns because people will see that and it'll start a conversation, but it also might encourage other folks to do that as well. And so there's different ways to do it that might not put people on the spot as well, right? Yeah.
Just one thing I was thinking of, so I have a coworker that has the pronouns of they, them. And at first, I felt really nervous about saying wrong. And so I would find ways to communicate without having to use pronouns because I didn't want to offend and say the wrong thing. And then I had to think about how that was about me and how I needed to educate myself. And I think for some people who are being educated about pronouns, that it's okay to ask questions, talk to people about it, and have a conversation to be comfortable and to be respectful. And I think that there's sometimes, like I was at a workshop where people were introducing their pronouns, and there were some folks that were giggling because they felt nervous. But what is great is I see a lot of people breaking through that and talking about what they don't know and how they want to be informed to do better. And so I think it's great to just talk more about it.
And I also think, I mean, the one guarantee that I can give myself and everyone in this room in life is that you're going to make mistakes, not only just on pronouns, but just in general. And the best thing that you can do is make a note of how it felt to you to make that mistake, you know, like how it felt embarrassing, it felt, you know, like oh, and then to hold yourself accountable to, you know, to do better next time. What you don't want to do is, you know, like, hey, well, he's going to do, oh my God, Emily, I'm so sorry. I know that you used they, them, and she, hers. Oh my God, right? Like, that's, right? Like, I don't need to, like, oftentimes we want to, like, apologize, and I'm really sorry for that irritation that I gave you. But it's really better just to, like, quickly be like, you know, they. And switch, and then acknowledge in yourself, like, ooh, that felt real crappy. But that's for me to go deal with,
Right.
And I know this is a new time in the world, right? It's great that we're cognizant of all these things. It's a really interesting thing to consider that we don't often need to use gendered pronouns on our daily basis, in the world, when we talk to people, when we meet people for the first time. It's not necessary. So it's good practice when you're meeting people, when you're talking to people, to just try to be neutral in how you address people. Use their name over and over again. It'll feel weird at first. Use they, their for the random people that you meet. See how it feels to stop using gendered pronouns. I have had some people say that they practice on their cats.
I practice.
Yeah. And honestly, it's helpful. Practice at home. Because if you have a new friend who says that they use gender-neutral pronouns, and you're in a habit, it's how you've talked your whole life to use gendered pronouns. It makes sense that it's a habit for you. And you want to avoid unintentionally hurting your friend as much as possible. So why not practice at home with Fluffy? I mean, so that's good stuff.
And I think that, talking about, pronouns is a good segue into, there are terminologies that you can use, and then there are terminologies that you shouldn't use. So, again, I warned you, my presentation style is to make you do the work. So, do folks have words that they know that you shouldn't say? And to help, yeah, right, it's okay. And there's a lot, and also there are also different levels, right? There are words that are derogatory and defamatory, right? And there are also words that are just outdated and not the most inclusive. So we don't have to directly, I think that everyone went, oh my gosh, he wants me to drop the F word and the T word, and oh my gosh, he is nuts. But what I'm trying to ask you to do is think of words that might be outdated, or words or terminology that,
And this is where...
Leslie?
What?
Leslie?
Yeah, Leslie.
Is that the kind of word you're looking for?
Sure, yeah,
And feel free to put out words you're not sure whether they're okay or not. Because we're acknowledging in this conversation that times are changing fast. Let's put out the words that you're not sure, and we'll be like, no, not anymore.
Or, if you're more comfortable, and we can go to the positive side, and think of, if you're thinking of a word that you shouldn't say, what should you say instead of? And we can go to the huzzah side.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
So if transvestite is a yowza.
Because that's not.
Yeah, that's a word we don't use. And Jen, do you want to share why?
Yeah, it's a derogatory term that's been used to put people down, and we don't own that word, that term really anymore. Transgender is the term that we use, and I think when people use the word transvestite, it shows me very quickly that they, aren't educated on the subject at all, and probably haven't even tried to look into the subject, and it's derogatory. It's hurtful. It's been used to harm people.
But Jen, you equated transvestite with transgender.
I was saying the good side of that, right, would be say they're transgender.
Well, except that to me a transvestite is a cross-dresser and not necessarily a transgender.
That could be true.
Yep.
Because that's what it means.
Right.
It literally means cross-dresser.
Right. And so this is a good point, right? When someone is saying transvestite, depending on what they're trying to make reference to, the correct word of what they're doing still falls under the transgender umbrella. Cross-dresser is talking about someone's behavior, and it still falls under the transgender umbrella, but we want to be careful with using cross-dresser because oftentimes that comes with a stigma, and it's used oftentimes to describe someone who identifies as a trans person, usually a trans woman, and so we want to make sure that if we're using cross-dresser, it's because we're echoing someone else's identity, and not making an assumption because we see someone who we aren't identifying because they don't have passing privilege, and we're not respecting them when we do that.
Or as an example, cross-dressing could be someone like me. was masculine, you know, you could use it in that way when that's not really, I'm not a cross-dresser.
Well, I'm
Right.
thinking of a
But do you know what I'm
friend of
saying? There's ways that
Right, but if there is someone, you know, who you're friends with and you know,
Yeah,
who
and
they
identifies as a
identify that way.
processor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the other word that's like that? That is often used for transgender? Is that too? I wasn't thinking that.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So I heard tranny and transsexual.
And, you know, again, when we're talking about transsexual, there are some people that use transsexual to identify themselves. And so any word that we say up here, I've done so many presentations, people be like, yeah, but I know John, and John uses, I'm like, okay, good. Then when we're talking about John and to John, we can, but in general, we want to try to avoid using these until someone tells us, this is how I like to identify.
And it's true that transsexual is an accurate medical term. It originated as a medical term. But once things are so heavily associated with stigma and all of the connotations and the discrimination, we stop using it. We don't want to hear it. So that's why we consider it an old term and we've retired it.
Dyke.
Depends who's using it.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. Straight people shouldn't call people that.
Right, so again, so the word dyke falls under the, you know, defamatory, right? It can be used as a derogatory term when you're hurling it at someone. But it can also, inside a community, be used as, you know, a term of endearment. But if I'm just meeting someone, or if I'm talking like, well, she's a big old dyke, like that's not a good use of that word, right? What word would I want to use instead of that? And also I would probably want to take a presentation like this and sit through it, help myself out. So I mean, in that situation, when you're using a derogatory term, do you really need to be talking about someone's sexual orientation at all? Probably not. And so we want to think of a more respectful word. So we're probably, if we are wanting to talk about them, we're talking about someone being a lesbian, and that's the better terminology, right? Yeah. Tomboy. So I think that tomboy is an interesting one, right? That we can put, depending on how it's being used, right? Because sometimes we use tomboy to justify a young person who might be trying to identify or trying to assert their identity as a transgender boy, right? And we might accidentally and unintentionally be like, you're just a tomboy, and we're discrediting their identity, right? So I think that's a really good word to flag, because how are we using it? Is that how someone is identifying, or are we trying to shape and use their gender expression in a binary way, or make assumptions about what their identity is? So I think that we can certainly lift a tomboy up as a word that can feel like a yowzer, but it also, sometimes people can use that as a positive way. So I think that's a great word to bring up. It has a lot of, it's a seesaw word, right? Thank you. What else?
Jay, I think it's interesting that you shared that part, your side of the word tomboy and how you feel about it. But when I was growing up as an athlete, as a female athlete, when I heard the word tomboy, immediately in my mind I thought, quickly do something that's more feminine, so that they're comfortable with my athleticism. And this happened early, you know what I mean? So I thought it was interesting, because I don't like that word.
Yeah, no, but it tries to put people back in the binary gender expression and correct that, right?
I
Because
always
what's
loved
the
that word, because as an athlete growing up, it meant I wasn't a girly girl.
Yeah.
So some people would like that term.
Yeah, so I think it goes back and forth. But what's the other side? What's the other word that we use? Tomboy. Sissy.
Yep, not so good.
Not so good, because gender norms are real. I mean, they're not real, but we try to make them real.
I'm going to put sissy up here because when researchers have looked at bullying of kids, what they learned is that while kids use slurs like "you're gay" as early as preschool and kindergarten, what kids are really talking about when they say gay is gender expression. They're interpreting that that the kid that they're making fun of is not fitting what they've already decided is the gender norm. That they're accusing the kid of stepping outside of the gender box that they think the kid is supposed to be in. They don't necessarily know what they're saying, that they're saying anything about sexual orientation. And sissy is that same thing.
And girl is used in the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they do that to boys in schools especially, middle school, oh, you're so gay.
Yeah.
But not meaning that they're gay, but meaning that you're a shitty athlete and so you must be gay.
Also, most of the
I
time,
mean, that's what they're saying.
also most of the time when people are fired from their jobs for being LGBT or being perceived to be LGBT, it isn't actually because of their sexual orientation. It's because of their gender expression and being perceived to be gay because of their gender expression. So.
Are there other terms that folks, yeah?
I feel uncomfortable or unsure about the word queer.
Yeah.
I feel uncomfortable using it, but I hear other people in the community use it.
Yeah, no, and so, and the word queer, I mean, not only, is it, folks within the LGBTQ community using it, but even when you're inside the LGBT community, there's folks that feel better using it, and there are people that feel uncomfortable using it, because there's a history, there's a connotation with that word.
Kind of going off that, I totally understand where that hesitation comes from because it has a history of being discriminatory, but for a lot of people it's seen as an umbrella term that they can use to identify as, I don't really know what my sexuality is, I'm kind of open to whatever because whoever I'm going to be attracted to, I'm going to be attracted to them. It doesn't matter what their sexuality is, it doesn't matter what their gender is, it doesn't matter any of that, I'm going to be attracted to who I'm going to be attracted to.
That's my team.
Yeah. So, and so when we think about the word queer, again, it's about echoing how someone else wants to identify, right? If someone is using the word queer, that's their identity, and we should respect that and use that. But there are folks that, it doesn't have a good connotation, it doesn't feel good when it's
So I don't feel comfortable using it. I struggle to even echo it back to someone who's saying it to me.
Yeah, and so
Because for me, and I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful in that, but
Yeah.
if someone's using the word to describe themselves as queer a lot, I mean, I grew up in West Texas. I never heard it used in a positive way, and I struggle to get that out.
Yeah. So like Allison, you and I talk, we talk all the time, right?
Yeah.
So, and I say I'm queer all the time.
Right.
So it's okay, I'm just gonna out this conversation.
Yeah.
But, I choose that, right? So if I'm comfortable with it, then I'm gonna be just real frank. That's on you.
Right, sure.
Well, and I think too,
It's something you have to
And
learn
I-
to do, figure out.
but I think
where
too,
I feel uncomfortable using it.
Right, and where you
Okay.
feel, exactly.
and I also think, fortunately, there are often times where you have to talk about someone's sexual orientation. In planning, yeah. Well, that is what I call you. Yeah. Good old queer Jen. But so we're not in a position where you have to, where we're often having to talk about people. But it is something to consider about why that makes you uncomfortable, and also just respect, how people want to use that. I think the interesting thing is, in a survey done by Glisten in 2015, I think is the last one that they did, almost 50% of middle school and high school students that they surveyed did not identify as straight. They identified as something other than straight.
Mine too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was like, oh, are you fact checking me? That's why I didn't give the exact statistic, because I don't know. But it's close to, it's around that stat. I failed math twice, it's fine. Yeah.
But also the history in the word queer, sometimes when I'm walking into a room that is just so friggin' straight, my mind just smiles and says, I'm here and I'm queer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just, the history of the word, and it's this, we used to parade with that slogan, and so it's like,
I made a habit of, in order to show respect to my LGBTQ elders, I don't throw that word around as the regular word I use in conversation and presentations when there are a great number of elder LGBTQ people, because it was the word that was used while they were getting beaten and kicked out of bars and all of this. Yes, it was a powerful word for revolutionary times as well, but it was also a painful, literally painful word. It's empowering to a lot of the people in the younger generation as well, and that's wonderful. But if we can avoid the likelihood that it's hurting people when we can see that that likelihood could exist, then we'll do that. So again, it's if people announce that that's how they identify, then we respect that. And you read your crowd, but there aren't many times when you're like, all you queer people.
Well, and what comes up and often, it's with the word queer, but it can be used for any of these words, and any, even the term homosexual is a medical term that we don't really use much, right? But the interesting thing is all of these words, and the reason that I have such a problem with glossaries is that words have a historical connotation and they have a cultural connotation, right? So, Texas is a little bit different than Michigan, though we don't have a lot to brag about. Okay? And so, but I grew up in California, and when I moved to Michigan, I was weird. Not because of just because I am weird, but because I was coming from California. And so there's this cultural, even when you go across the United States, but globally as well. So when we're thinking of words, that's why it's best to echo people. And if someone says something that you don't know, you can ask them, you can put on your social work hat and go, can you tell me what that means to you? So you can get a clear definition of what that means to that person, so that you're not carrying those assumptions, right?
Although my preference is that a straight cis person not use the word queer unless they're saying so-and-so identifies as.
Yeah.
That's because that's not their word.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we move on in any way, I wanted to just go over one more word or a couple variations on another word. What about transgenders or transgendered? I see that a lot.
Yeah. So I'm having two different reactions. One, the side of me that loves the English language does this, but also as someone who is trans. So when we say transgendered or transgenders, transgender is a noun. We don't want to make it into a verb.
Right.
And so the proper way to say is a trans person, transgender person, a transgender woman, a transgender man, a trans... Yes, sorry, listen, it's been a long day. You are correct. And so what we want to make sure that we are not adding an ED to it, and that we're adding another descriptor afterward.
We like calling someone woman.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't do that to Jay.
Yeah.
Jay is a trans person. I am a genderqueer person, I guess. Yeah. I'm figuring it out. Shh, shut up.
It's getting hostile in here.
Shut your Bible. Is there anything else? Is there another word? Yeah.
Are the terms butch and femme still used?
That's good. That again is back to we just like I'm going to trust you when you tell me who you are. You know who you are. I'm going to trust you when you say how you identify yourself, how you describe yourself. I identify as brazen femme. And femme in the queer community is F-E-M-M-E. And femme means like it's not feminine. It's like super powerful, almost like aggressively feminine. And that doesn't have anything to do with your gender identity necessarily. I can identify as any gender and still be like, this is how I express myself and how I walk into a room. And butch is the same way, obviously, because there are those who identify as lesbians, as women, who identify as butch, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So certainly those two categories, those two ways of identifying are still in the community, and
See, that has a history to it as well.
yeah,
You know, back in the 20s when women were together, they couldn't go outside of the house without one dressing traditionally male and often passed for a male, even though that wasn't their choice. That was the only way they could function in the world at that time. So that's where those terms came from, really. And then the straight community, the heterosexual community, picked it up as a derogatory label because if you were a lesbian and you dressed traditionally more masculine, they called you a butch right away, or your hair was shorter. And the femme was like going, oh, you're a lipstick dyke. I mean, so you know, those are all terms that came from long ago.
and we've had to either embrace them or,
Which as an older lesbian, you know, I took those words back, so
Yeah.
they don't bother me because, you know, if you take those words back, they can't hurt you anymore.
yeah,
So I just think it's good to know where they came from.
yeah,
Thank you.
that's great.
Thanks a lot.
Anything
My favorite was always homo. He's such a homo.
Yeah, and now there's the no homo, which is a phrase that folks use to make sure that if they do, you know, mostly men and young men, when they do something a little too feminine, or if they express any sort of affection, like I love you, man, no homo. It's a way to correct, yeah. So that would be a yowzer. But yeah, so I think that it's now we've added more words to it as well.
What about like metrosexual? Is that just a cultural term?
Metrosexual, like
I think that's homophobic, and
Yeah,
also
it is.
It's because that's also outside of gender
It is.
expression norm boxes.
well, yeah, it's to describe a straight man who has too much stylish.
Who
to-
dresses
who just
It's like a straight man who takes care of
matches and coordinates.
But it's almost it's almost a put down in a way though.
Yeah.
Saying it's not good to be homosexual, but you're a metrosexual, so you're a little better. I mean, that's my thought. I don't know if that's right, but
Right.
no.
I just want to add to that too, that a lot of the terms that people are throwing out are terms that come in and out of use by decade even.
Yeah.
And so the purpose of going through these, if you use this terminology, we're not trying to make people feel guilty about using this, like we are all in the tree of trust here, right? We're learning. We're here to get educated on the terminology that is being used now and to be respectful about how people are identifying themselves. So I appreciate that everyone's sharing, and I don't want anyone to feel guilty when we toss out metrosexual, because in the 90s, that's what we were saying, and that was okay then.
We had a TV show called Queer Eye for the Street.
Yeah.
I don't know if we all blocked that out. I tried to. Yeah. No, and Aaron, I appreciate that. I think that these are when we're talking about what folks can do to be allies, it's an opportunity to figure out how to do better, and it's a starting point, right? Changing our language to being more inclusive and more caring and respectful is an opportunity to invite more folks in, right?
And not just about LGBTQ people, but in general, always looking more deeply at what we might actually be implying with our words. What is the meaning beyond the meaning? What is the root?
We're way over.
We're done.
Our time.
We're a smaller group than the smallest group we've had, so this is okay.
So, if there are final questions or anything, we'll stay up here, but I want to make sure that folks have time to stretch
Talk a little bit about the idea of intersectionality. A lot of us come here and we've joined in a progressive movement that's been building across the country because we have an issue that stands out as important to us. We're passionate about anti-racist work. We are passionate about healthcare. We're passionate about immigration issues, right? But in all of these issues, whether tonight we talk about the issues that affect the LGBT community, all of these issues intersect with one another. Whether we talk about environmental policy, the environmental policy affects issues when we talk about racism. It affects policies that we should take through in education. It affects the health and well-being of our communities and healthcare policies. All of these issues that we care about, whatever the one is that wakes you up, that makes you show up to the events and to the meetings, that issue intersects with the other ones that we're here about today. So Jay mentioned pride. Some of you are part of the LGBTQ task force. Some of you are involved in other task force. Whatever your issue is, that issue impacts the LGBTQ community. And so we want all of you to show up and step up and volunteer at Pride. ProKzoo is going to have a table. We want you there. We want to show that not only do we support the LGBT community, but we recognize that community is our community. We're one community. Our issues intersect together. And when we recognize that and we work like that, that's when we can make real change. It starts here, and then it builds in our community and in our world. So I want all of you to be ready to show up to do that, to support one another, okay? All right.
Before we do some breakouts too, I also just want to say, Jen Strebs just applied to be a trustee in Kalamazoo Township, so. And also, Carrie Knowlton for Alamo Township.
Okay.
And we know, David Benak is running for Congress, he's here. So I just want to mention, thanks for those people for being here. You two are great. We really appreciate it. We're gonna break off into our groups. And afterward, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we believe these groups are working. I have some ideas. I don't think they're working as well as kind of we anticipated them to work. Some of them are doing really great things, but I'd really like us to see us kind of do more things cohesively and together. So the coordinating committee, we're all kind of talking about how do we restructure. So please start thinking about that as we break into our groups today. Maybe talk about that for a little bit. I know you're not going to have a lot of time today, but we're a short group, so. All right, any questions? I'll be around.